Ivan, thank you to Damda. Good ones. Thank you also for the organizers for the opportunity not only to come back to the mothership, but also to participate in such an important session and such a timely session along a phenomenal group of panelists. I want to focus my opening statement on the American Express ruling. And I know that, Aaron, you're planning to talk about it, and Howard, I know that you're planning to talk about it too. So I'll actually make your life a little bit easier by avoiding questions that pertain to merits. So assume for a minute, at least go with me to a place where we all agree that the decision itself was the right decision and that it's based on the right merits. And I see Howard already shaking his head. I'm just going to clarify that I'm not going to take a position as whether it was the right decision or not. But what I want to do is rather clarify that notwithstanding the merits of the decision, the potential implication, the ramification of this ruling is so critical and is so important because it so easily opens up the door for unintended consequences that have to do with over-inclusion of what we think of as a two-sided market is a very narrow and limited set of circumstances to potentially far broader implications. And the point that I want to make is that in itself should be a concern, even if we would all agree that the decision was the right decision based on the merits. Now, I want to actually focus on, I want to, just to place the ruling in context, I want to make three observations from the economics of two-sided markets and network effects. And the first one, relates to the fact that it is really questionable whether we have a good working definition in the economic literature as to what two-sided markets are. Now, when I say, let me just clarify that statement. When I say that we don't necessarily have a good working definition, if we think about, is there really a definition that is an applicable standard that can be consistently implemented and tested that would indicate or enable us to determine whether a specific market is a two-sided market or not. Now, let me kind of clarify that. We all may agree that when looking at whether a specific market is a two-sided market, we're looking for some kind of large or meaningful or considerable network effects. I don't know that we know what that actually means. Now, a lot of us may assume another kind of radical assumption that economists have reached a consensus around the Tirol paper. And I think that if you would consider that potentially as a good working standard, I would argue that that is actually a conceptual framework that, according to the author's own admissions, is incomplete because it depends on pricing strategies and often is very difficult to observe. So I think that if we carefully look at the literature, and even if we assume that there's some kind of consensus in the literature, the overall overwhelming conclusion that comes out of it is that it is really questionable whether we have a working, implementable standard that we can apply empirical tests for to actually determine which markets fall under two-sided markets and which ones don't. So that's kind of like the first, let me just be clear, that in itself should be a concern about the ruling. The fact that we have what would be a dramatic shift in the burden for government agencies and plaintiffs that is not based on a testable or implementable hypothesis. Now, what potentially makes it even worse, and I'm getting to my second observation, is if we consider the incidence of two-sided markets. Anyone that reads I should say that before, if we read the economic literature, and there has been so much that has been written about two-sided markets, at least since 2001, it is a very common and evident observation that the phenomenon itself is very frequent and widespread. And while we may not all agree that all the markets are identified, even in peer-reviewed journals, as two-sided markets, unnecessarily two-sided markets, I think that it's the number of markets that are at least have been identified, or in which economists constructively thought that there's meaningful meaningful network effect. The number is staggering. And it's not just your common set of characters. It's not just the online platforms, it's not just payment cards. I mean, there's there's so many industries, spaces, markets, including things like shopping centers, fax machines, even commodity exchanges dating back to the Roman Empire. So if we're concerned about not having a definition, the fact that we recognize in the literature that this is so frequent and so widespread at this point should really make us lose sleep at night. And then we get to the third observation that I have. And I say, that's kind of unfair, it's of course from the literature. The third observation relates to kind of thinking about what are the determinants, or what are the reasons why we see two-sided platforms. And the question is whether they are ultimately the result of some kind of like underlying product characteristics that ultimately, or perhaps a market mechanism that makes these platforms two-sided, or alternatively, are they actually a matter of choice? Is it that firms, a matter of business strategy, decide to operate it in the two-sided markets? And I think that what's remarkable, there's like, of course, two examples that come to mind. Amazon is one example. It's a firm that used to kind of like buy and sell stuff. They gradually are shifting away from that, and they're now intermediating between buyers and sellers. So I think it's one example where we can look at the very same market and we see how strategy has shifted. Another example would be, of course, payment cards, where we see MasterCard and Visa intermediating between three distinct groups of actors, whereas American Express intermediates only between two groups. And I think it's interesting, because I think that as economists, we observe this diversity and variation in strategies. We observe variation and diversity in the very same market. And that probably leads, or should lead us to conclude that those are probably an evolution of different strategies. Now, let me just conclude, and I think if you gotta look at the totality of these three observations, I think they're really meaningful and they're really concerning about the ruling itself. And again, I know that you guys are probably gonna pick up on the merits of the ruling as well. One thing that I do want to conclude with, and it's kind of like a shout out to Mark Reisman, who wrote a very insightful review, in my opinion, in the Journal of Economic Perspectives. Mark makes the following observation, which is really interesting. He says, we see some level of network effects in nearly every market that we're looking at. And that probably suggests that the conversation should be about magnitude as opposed to categories. I think that it would be misguided for us to even try and put two-sided effects in a category. And if we think about that, and if we carefully read the ruling, that is precisely what the Supreme Court has done. So for that reason as well, I think that again, if we agree on the merits of the decision, I think that the precedent that it sets, the potential for over-inclusion, the potential for leaving some markets in and leaving some markets out is absolutely concerning. It can explain why government agencies and plaintiffs in the U.S. are absolutely terrified about the potential ramifications of the decision.
Thanks, Danny. Aaron?